Conspiracies are real. They really do happen. They classify documents in the name of national security, and then later we find out about stuff like Operation Paperclip and the Tuskegee experiment.
Movies like National Treasure.
And they formed a new brotherhood called the Freemasons in honor of the builders of the Great Temple.
It elected 8 congressmen, but lost the 1828 presidential election to Andrew Jackson, a proud Mason. The conspiracy theories began.
All these men with different neighborhoods, different professions, meeting in the cafe, breaking bread together, doing rituals. What could this be?
Freemasonry began in medieval Europe as a guild for stonemasons, but lived on as a social organization.
1717, the first Grand Lodge is created in London.
Theories.
Because so much organized crime uses the Masonic secret system and the good old boy network to be able to get away with murder.
It's the source of legends. It's the world's most well-known secret society, rich with symbols and ritual.
In 1929, easy monetary policies had pushed wealth into the hands of just a few.
A central bank oversees a nation's monetary system. With their ability to dictate the direction of an economy, central banks play a pivotal role in a country's growth. In most cases, they are not a government agency, even though they serve their nation. Central banks control monetary policy, which means they manipulate liquidity in the financial system to influence the economy. Their actions will determine currency stability, as well as the levels of inflation and employment. To control monetary policy, central banks issue currency and set interest rates on loans and bonds. Central banks raise interest rates to slow growth and avoid inflation. They'll lower rates to spur growth.
The central banking model from the Bank of England and the United States has now been put in all countries, and even consolidated power in parts of Europe as the European Central Bank, or ECB. This unites separate countries under one economic policy. The only places in the world that don't have central banks are North Korea, Iran, and Cuba.
4 decades of central bank monetary manipulation, lower and lower interest rates, and free money have all flowed to the very top. The top 1% has gained $21 trillion in wealth. The top 20 people in the world are worth $1.31 trillion. According to the Federal Reserve, the bottom 3.75 billion people are worth $1.3 trillion.
Today, the Federal Reserve is the most powerful entity in the United States, and they're not ashamed to admit it either. Here's former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan.
What should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. What the relationships are don't frankly matter.
In addition to this, it seems that the Fed can't even be touched by investigating parties.
So I'm asking you if your agency has, in fact, according to Bloomberg, extended $9 trillion in credit, which, by the way, works out to $30,000 for every single man, woman, and child in this country. I'd like to know, if you're not responsible for investigating that, who is?
We have responsibility for the Federal Reserve's programs and operations, audits, to conduct audits and investigations in that area. In terms of who's responsible for investigating, would you mind repeating the question one more time?
Fintech companies are sprouting everywhere across the world. Like we said, 64% increase in activity, and that's expected to surge even more. How do you regulate such activities when you may not even know of their existence or their activity?
Money backed by nothing is known as fiat currency. Fiat in Latin means let it be done. If every currency on earth is backed by nothing, how am I able to pay for things? Well, as it turns out, the whole economic system today is running because it's backed by faith. Faith that you can exchange your unit of currency for goods or services. When the government needs more money than they receive from taxes, they ask the Treasury Department for money. The Treasury then receives an IOU or bond from the government. The Treasury, through the banks, gives this IOU to the Federal Reserve. The Fed then writes a check for this IOU and hands it to the banks. At this exchange at the banks, money is created and it can be used to pay government bills.
Through American history, this consciousness of vulnerability, this consciousness of decline, this consciousness of a past greatness that somehow we may be falling short of.
Make America great again.
Make America great again.
Politicians have capitalized on this vulnerability, but they're missing the point.
The narrative of decline and fall of Rome that has prevailed in America's minds has assumed that the fall was both the end of the story and the bad part. What if after the fall is the time we should be concentrating on as modern Americans?
Colossal $20 trillion debt racked up by the federal government. In earlier days, debt was increased by modest amounts. But more recently, the debt has increased by at least $1 trillion during each of the last 5 presidencies. This includes nearly $10 trillion added between 2009 to 2017 during the Obama administration. The total debt today? Over $20 trillion, the highest it's ever been. Using debt to GDP, the U.S. has the 8th highest debt of advanced economies at 104%. But by using debt to revenue, a ratio comparing debt size to federal tax dollars, the U.S. ranks number 2 in the world at an extraordinary 979%, second only to Japan.
The modern United States is the most powerful country in human history, with over 800 military bases and 37% of global military spending. The U.S. has become the leader of a vast, interconnected global system that has helped usher in an era of unprecedented prosperity and low levels of conflict. During this time, America also began using its influence to protect its growing commercial and military interests abroad, installing pro-American regimes in places like Nicaragua, and playing a major role in international diplomacy regarding the Western presence in China. World War I showed just how much America's influence had grown. Not only was American intervention a decisive factor in the war's end, but President Wilson attended the Paris Peace Conference, which ended the war, and attempted to set the terms of the peace. He spearheaded America's most ambitious foreign policy initiative yet, an international organization called the League of Nations, designed to promote peace and cooperation globally. The League, a wholesale effort to remake global politics, showed just how ambitious American foreign policy had become. But while the UN is the most famous of the post-war institutions, it isn't the only one. 730 delegates from all 44 allied nations came together in a small vacation haven in New Hampshire. Their goal? To establish a global financial system that would prevent another Great Depression and World War. The resulting agreement, called the Bretton Woods Agreement, ultimately became the backbone of the global financial system, resulting in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. After the Berlin Wall fell, the US could have withdrawn from the system, severing ties with its allies and drawing down the size of its military. And while the US did decrease military spending, much of the military infrastructure and alliances from the Cold War remained. Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton decided that it was in both America and the world's interests for the United States, now the sole superpower on Earth, to continue actively managing global affairs.
We should be and we must be peacemakers.
Washington's support for countries like Israel and Japan stayed intact, ostensibly as a means of preventing war in their respective regions. The global system of alliances and institutions created to keep the peace during the Cold War became permanent, as did the American military and political commitments necessary to keep them running.
Early in the history of warfare, man learned that the best formula for victory was compounded of striking power, mobility, and self-protection.
The US is easily the most powerful country to have ever existed, and it certainly spends more on its military budget than any other country does today. That's all pretty well known, but less well known is the fact that the US has around 800 military bases around the globe.